I'm going to be ranking and grading every single team's 2023 NFL draft class. This is part 2. Make sure you go watch part 1 where I ranked 32 through 17. This is part 2 going through 16 through 1. But then the Patriots are going to throw in those curveballs, and such as guys like Marte Mapu out of Sacramento State going in the third round. He was the first player that went that I didn't have graded. I'm going to give that a C. And then Jake Andrews out of Troy. I did not know who he was as well. I'm going to give that a C+. And then they go with Chad Ryland, a kicker, in the fourth round. And then they also draft Bryce Baringer in the sixth round. They go ahead and get their two special teams guys, Sidey Snow out of Eastern Michigan, Antonio Mafi out of UCLA, and then Keyshawn Butte out of LSU. Look, I really hate Keyshawn Butte. I really think he shouldn't have gotten drafted, to be honest. Even though he had a really good 2021 season, this guy has documented character concerns. He had a horrible year at LSU. His coaches didn't like him, and that's also documented. And he had a horrendous combine where he had like a 2 RAS score, and his vertical was like 29. I don't love Keyshawn Butte at all, but and it doesn't feel like a Patriots pick at all. Patriots like to pick high character guys, and Keyshawn Butte, I don't think is one of those. And then you got an all name team, Amari Speed, cornerback out of Michigan State, and then you get Isaiah Bolden out of Jackson State. Out of Jackson State, of course, was coached by Deion Sanders. They had a lot of weird picks that a lot of people didn't know these players. And, of course, I didn't know them because they're from, like, Division II schools. But their first two picks really carried this draft class for me with Christian Gonzalez and Keon White. And then they picked some special teams guy. But overall, I'm going to give it a B. It was a weird mix of guys that I didn't know and then guys that I really liked. And I'm going to have them at 15. The Packers did what needed to be done in this draft class. I'm going to have them at 14, and they're going to be my first team that I'm going to give a B+. They definitely did what needed to be done, which was build around Jordan Love, which they haven't done with Aaron Rodgers for a while now. It's the first time they've drafted a receiver within the first 2 rounds or they drafted Christian Watson last year. They draft Jaden Reed here. In the first round, of course, they got Lucas Van Ness. I think this pick is definitely overhated. I like Lucas Van Ness. He's a really good combination of speed and power and size. Of course, it's 6'5", 272 pounds. I really like the Luke Musgrave pick going to Green Bay. Luke Musgrave, I basically describe him as the Anthony Richardson of the tight end class. He is raw out of Oregon State, but he's a really good pass catcher, and he's really fast. Had a great Senior Bowl. Going to give that pick an A-. And then Jaden Reed out of MSU, out of Michigan State. He was that number 1 receiver out of Michigan State, but there are some size concerns, and he'll probably be in the slot. And I don't think they needed another slot guy. I think they should have gotten a bigger outside receiver at that selection in the second round. But then they double dip on tight end and go with Tucker Kraft, who Tucker Kraft is another is more of a red zone, big-bodied tight end. So now they have 2 tight ends that are going to flip, whether it's Luke Musgrave, he's the more athletic speed tight end, and then you're going to get that bigger tight end in Tucker Kraft. So I like that dual tight end tandem. They're probably going to play a lot of 12 personnel with Aaron Jones, and then those 2 tight ends there. They picked Colby Warren in the 4th round, which I think was good value at Auburn. But then the pick that I really hated for them was Sean Clifford. I thought he was a lock to go undrafted out of Penn State. And he goes in the 5th round. I didn't care for that pick as much. And then they got a bunch of guys that I didn't grade. They got a kicker, Andrews Carson, Dontavian Wicks. I gave a B-. And then they get Anthony Johnson Jr., Iowa State safety, in the 7th round, which I did like that pick. Overall, I'm going to give them a B+. They had a goal. They completed their goal, which was to build around Jordan Love, and you can't complain about that. I had the Atlanta Falcons at 13. They are another team that didn't pick a lot. They also had only 6 picks, 2 of those being in the 7th round. But I really, really liked 2 of their picks. I think Bijan Robinson gets way too much hate right now. He was drafted 8th overall to the Atlanta Falcons, and I think people are too nearsighted in their focus with that Bijan Robinson selection because they're like, oh, you didn't need a running back, you've got Tyler Algier. But you got to think that Arthur Smith, head coach of the Atlanta Falcons, he is coming from a system that has a bell cow running back, and that system really worked with Derrick Henry, of course, Arthur Smith coming from the Tennessee Titans 2 years ago. And you get Bijan Robinson, who was my 3rd highest rated player. I think he's a potential Pro Bowler. You could potentially win Offensive Rookie of the Year. But now your offense has is so dynamic because now you have Tyler Algier and Bijan Robinson in the backfield. You can move Cordell Patterson back out to wide receiver, and Bijan Robinson can even have time within the slot because Bijan Robinson has really good hands and good route running for a running back. And plus, he's that bell cow. You can have him on every down, or you can run an I-form formation with Cordell Patterson in the fullback, and he could run a wheel route out to the outside. You've still got Drake London as your X receiver. You've got Kyle Pitts as essentially your Y. Kyle Pitts is going to usually will play wide receiver for the Atlanta Falcons, not as a down lineman. You get Matthew Bergeron in the second round, which I also think was good value. He has potential to start at right tackle. Zach Harrison was the only pick that I really didn't like for them. I thought that it was definitely a reach at 3 out of Ohio State, but then they get Clark Phillips in the fourth round, which I really like because now your secondary is complete because you got A.J. Terrell on the outside, you got Jeff Okudah on the outside, and now you have Clark Phillips in the slot, who I had a second round grade on. So overall, I actually do like the Atlanta Falcons draft. I think that the Bijan Robinson, for a lot of people, would bring it so far down just due to the positional value at 8, but I think that Bijan Robinson is definitely worth a top 15 pick. So I am going to give it a B+. I had the Atlanta Falcons at 13. They are another team that didn't pick a lot. They also had only 6 picks, 2 of those being in the 7th round. But I really, really liked 2 of their picks. I think Bijan Robinson gets way too much hate right now. He was drafted 8th overall to the Atlanta Falcons, and I think people are too nearsighted in their focus with that Bijan Robinson selection because they're like, oh, you didn't need a running back. You've got Tyler Algier. But you got to think that Arthur Smith, head coach of the Atlanta Falcons, he is coming from a system that has a bell cow running back, and that system really worked with Derrick Henry, of course, Arthur Smith coming from the Tennessee Titans 2 years ago. And you get Bijan Robinson, who was my 3rd highest rated player. I think he's a potential Pro Bowler. You could potentially win Offensive Rookie of the Year. But now your offense is so dynamic because now you have Tyler Algier and Bijan Robinson in the backfield. You can move Cordell Patterson back out to wide receiver, and Bijan Robinson can even have time within the slot because Bijan Robinson has really good hands and good route running for a running back. And plus, he's that bell cow. You can have him on every down, or you can run an I-form formation with Cordell Patterson in the fullback, and he could run a wheel route out to the outside. You've still got Drake London as your X receiver. You've got Kyle Pitts as essentially your Y. Kyle Pitts is going to usually will play wide receiver for the Atlanta Falcons, not as a down lineman. You get Matthew Bergeron in the second round, which I also think was good value. He has potential to start at right tackle. Zach Harrison was the only pick that I really didn't like for them. I thought that it was definitely a reach at 3 out of Ohio State, but then they get Clark Phillips in the fourth round, which I really like because now your secondary is complete because you got A.J. Terrell on the outside, you got Jeff Okudah on the outside, and now you have Clark Phillips in the slot, who I had a second round grade on. So overall, I actually do like the Atlanta Falcons draft. I think that the Bijan Robinson, for a lot of people, would bring it so far down just due to the positional value at 8, but I think that Bijan Robinson is definitely worth a top 15 pick. So I am going to give it a B+. I'm going to have the Arizona Cardinals at 12. I think they had a really good draft class, and they were very smart with their trades. That's what I really like about the draft class the most. Even though I can't add the 2024 Texans first-round pick into their draft class, of course, because the draft class isn't dictated by next year's pick, they traded back from 3 to 12 with the Houston Texans. They got their first-round pick next year. The Houston Texans probably won't be a top 15 pick. That's 2 top 10 picks for them. I think that was a really smart trade down for them. And then you go ahead and trade up for your offensive tackle 1, Paris Johnson Jr. And Paris Johnson Jr. will probably start within the next couple of years. He's a true left tackle. You do have DJ Humphries, who is still under contract, but there is an opt-out in 2024, so Paris Johnson Jr. then probably becomes the full-time starter there. Even though I think it was a little bit of a reach at 6, Paris Johnson Jr., I don't think any of the offensive tackles were really worth a top 10 pick this year. Maybe last year, but definitely not this year. Paris Johnson Jr. still has some issues with his technique. Sometimes he'll wrap defenders and he'll let defenders get into his chest far too quickly. So defenders will, get into his chest early and push him back, and then he'll try to just wrap them, which is not how technique is taught. You want to get that punch in early. But Paris Johnson Jr. is such a good athlete that he can recover from losses really quickly because his and he'll slide his feet in the correct direction. And you saw that a lot in the Ohio State tape. So it's an interesting pick. Hopefully they can develop that punch, because I think he does have that power. Maybe not that exact play strength. But then moving on from that, Bija Ojulari was a solid pickup in the second round. I give that a B+. Garrett Williams was another solid pickup in the third round. I also give that a B+. Michael Wilson, there were better receivers on the board out of Stanford, and I do think he's overrated. He also is a smaller receiver in the slot. You have a ton of slot guys in Arizona. And then John Gaines, again, a guy that I didn't have graded, gave that a C+. Clayton Tune, Owen Popoe, both in the 5th round. I gave them both Bs because that's where both of them were probably going to end up going. So, overall, it's a fine draft class. Of course, I'm going to add in that Houston Texans first-round pick into the into the rankings because they traded very well. But the overall class, I am going to give a B+. I think the Denver Broncos had an underrated draft class this year. I gave them a B+. I like the Marvin Mims pick, even though I think it was a bit early for Marvin Mims. I thought he was a really solid third-round guy. They get him at the tail end of the second round at the 63rd pick. Not really going to complain about that. And then you get Drew Sanders, which I thought was a really good pick. Drew Sanders is a situational pass rusher, strong side linebacker, a run defender, and you can blitz him through the A gap. And Drew Sanders had 9.5 sacks and like 3 forced fumbles last year. So he's got that pass rushing ability as well as being that strong side linebacker that's going to be a run clogger. And then you get 2 safeties back-to-back with Riley Moss and then J.L. Skinner. Riley Moss is a more athletic, smaller nickel and free safety type of cornerback. Of course, he ran a 4.4 at the combine. He's around like 6 foot, 190. Has that athletic ability. I had a fourth round grade on him, and he goes in the 3rd round, so I gave that a B+. And then, of course, J.L. Skinner, he's my 3rd safety in the entire class. He's 6'4", like 209, not the greatest tackler. However, he is another ball-hawking guy. So now you have 3 really good ball-hawking safeties with Justin Simmons, now Riley Moss, and J.L. Skinner. And then they got Alice Forsyth, a backup center, in the 7th round. So overall, I pretty much liked every one of their picks. I didn't have any disparities, so I am going to give them a B+ and have them at 11. The Panthers are another team that also had a really solid draft class where I didn't have any disparities on any of their picks. You see, they picked 5 times in this draft class, or in this draft. However, every single one of those players I actually had graded, which is always fun and easy for me. Bryce Young, of course, went number 1 overall. I like that pick. I've talked about Bryce Young enough a lot, of course, of his height concerns. He's 5'10", 204 pounds. However, he's a wizard after the play is broken down and has that Russell Wilson type ability where he can create after the play and extend the play as well. He's also got good accuracy. He leads receivers. He's got good poise in the pocket. He can take a hit. However, there are those durability concerns, of course. He was my number 11 player in this entire class. Yeah. Or number 9, I'm pretty sure. He's somewhere around there. But then in the second round, they pick up Jonathan Mingo. Jonathan Mingo is a bigger type receiver in a class where there are a ton of slots. I've been saying this a bunch. But Jonathan Mingo is a 6'2 guy, around 205, and he's a receiver that can catch the ball. Super important for Bryce Young to have is a jump ball receiver, and Jonathan Mingo is one of those jump ball receivers. And I liked that pick in the second round. However, I did have a 4th round grade on him. I thought it was a little bit of a reach, especially at 39 where they got him. But I am still going to give that a B. DJ Johnson, I definitely thought was a reach. I had a 5th round grade on him, gave that a B-. But then you match that with Chandler Zavala, who I thought was underrated out of NC State and a good pass protector, especially at the guard position for Bryce Young. So you get 2 guys who are on the offensive side for Bryce Young. And then you also get 2 guys on the defensive side who were right around where I thought they were to be drafted, except a little bit ahead. Like Jamie Robinson, I thought would probably go in the 4th round. DJ Johnson go in the 5th round, or in the 4th round. They drafted him 1 round before where I projected them, so both those get a B-. But overall, you hopefully get your franchise quarterback of the future. You get a good wide receiver to pair with him. You get a good guard to pair with that. So I have no problems with that, of course. So I am going to give them a B+ and have them at 10. The Bengals are another team that really didn't miss in this draft either. So in the 1st round, they drafted Myles Murphy at 28. I like this pick. He's going to be a hand-in-the-dirt 5-tech who can possibly push into the 3-tech, which I think he might end up doing. I don't know exactly his role in the Bengals because they do have 2 3-down edge rushers there with Trey Hendrickson on the outside. And then they also get, and Miles Murphy will probably rotate in the first year and be that run clogger, which I think he has really good ability. He reminds me a lot of Trayvon Walker with that really good run ability with that pass rushing upside. So it felt like a really good, or like a traditional Bengals pick there. And they get DJ Turner, who's underrated. This is a cornerback who ran a 4.26 at the combine. And at Michigan, of course, you could see that speed on full display. And, they're, of course, building that cornerback group in Cincinnati as they got Chidobe Awuzie, Mike Hilton, and now DJ Turner in the slot, replacing Eli Apple, essentially, who's going to have to keep up with those fast receivers. And then you get Jordan Battle, who is a true free safety out of Alabama, of course. He's going to be that Jesse Bates replacement, so I gave that a B+. And then you get Charlie Jones, who's going to be that slot guy who you're going to mix in with Jamar Chase and then T. Higgins on the outside. Now you get Charlie Jones in the slot out of Purdue, who had an underrated year last year that wasn't talked about enough. He had 110 catches, led the FBS, and they also had 1,100 yards to go along with 10 touchdowns. And then Chase Brown, this is going to be essentially your Joe Mixon replacement, as Joe Mixon, I think, probably gets cut within the next couple of years. And Chase Brown out of Illinois is solid. And then in the 6th round, you get the Princeton wide receiver, Andrea Iovasky, or Yosivas. I didn't have him graded, of course. And then Brad Robbins, punter, whatever. DJ Ivey out of Miami. So overall, I think they definitely had a top 10 draft class. Their first 5 picks were all good picks that made sense, so I am going to give them a B+. The Cleveland Browns are another team that had a ton of hits in this draft class, and they really did that with not a ton of ammo. They had no first-round pick, of course, Deshaun Watson trade, and they also had no second-round pick. And they also had a bunch of late picks. They had 2 late thirds as well. But with those picks, they had some phenomenal selections. Starting off with Cedric Tillman out of Tennessee, who I thought was better than Jalen Hyatt. He went 1 pick after him. He's a big body receiver who's phenomenal at the catch point. Of course, he's like 6'3", 215. Big receiver at the catch point. He's probably going to play the X at Cleveland, as you have Elijah Moore in the slot, and then at the Y, you're going to have Amari Cooper, and then Donovan Peoples-Jones as your wide receiver 4. Really like the selection if you can develop him. He isn't, of course, the most athletic, and he doesn't have the largest route tree, but he's really good at the catch point. And then you get Saiki Ika, who was my 4th highest rated interior defensive lineman. I also gave this an A+. He's going to be your run clogger. The Cleveland Browns were not good at run stopping last year. Of course, they were 28th in run defense last year. And you get Saiki Ika, who is that true nose tackle with pass rushing upside, who I think is a 2-down nose tackle. Of course, you're going to have him on 1st and 2nd downs. And then on 3rd downs, you're going to put in a rotational pass rushing defensive tackle. But Saiki Ika is a really good run clogger, and I gave that an A. And then DeJuan Jones is another guy that I gave an A. He is humongous. He's 6'8", 374 pounds. I had him also within my top 30 on my top 50 big board. DeJuan Jones goes in the 4th round when I had a 2nd round grade on him. I thought the reason why he fell, of course, was his athletic ability and his technique. He's really raw out of Ohio State, but that size is just something that you really can't get. And if you can develop him, you could have a really good run defending tackle, as he does specialize in run blocking. But he's not going to start right away. He's going to be maybe down the depth chart. He'll be the number 2 right tackle, and I really think that's only where he is. I think he's a true right tackle. But if you're in goal line situations and you need a guard to throw in there, or if you need a 6th offensive lineman, you put DeJuan Jones in there, and then he's just going to completely clear a path, as he's so big with such a large wingspan. Also, he's got the same wingspan as Joel Embiid. And then Isaiah McGuire in the 4th round was solid. Dorian Thompson-Robinson, I think, is super underrated at the quarterback position, and you go and grab him in the 5th round, and then you get Luke Weipler. This is another backup center out of Ohio State, of course. So you get 2 Ohio State offensive linemen that are going to back you up, who I thought were both really good value for where they were taken. I'm going to give this draft an overall A-. You can see the A's throughout the entire draft class. Going to have them at 8. I'm going to have the Baltimore Ravens at 7. They had 6 picks, and I think they hit on around 3 of them. Zay Flowers, I'm definitely going to give this an A+. This was my 3rd overall player that I had when I ranked and graded every single first round pick. Zay Flowers ended up being 3 for me. He is my 6th overall prospect this entire draft class. I love Zay Flowers out of Boston College, of course. And then I gave this pick an A+. At 22, he is the 3rd wide receiver taken when I thought he was the number 1 wide receiver in this draft class. He has a special ability after the catch to just create something out of nothing. And I really love receivers that have that ability, especially within the slot. He also has incredible agility, and he also has really good route running. And then for Lamar Jackson, you get your slot. You finally get a guy who's going to get open consistently, who's going to pair with Odell Beckham Jr. and Rashad Bateman, who's your deep threat. And now you have your safety net slot guy who you're going to target a bunch in the intermediate routes and then on crosser routes, and he's going to get open a ton. I love Zay Flowers. I think he has a really good chance to potentially even win Offensive Rookie of the Year. And then you grab Trenton Simpson, who is more of a Mike, or more of a smaller Mike, potential weak side linebacker out of Clemson, who is still a little raw, but he is a tackling machine, and he will get that production. And I had a 2nd round grade on him. He goes in the 3rd, so I gave that an A-. But the Travis Robinson pick out of Ole Miss, I did think was a reach. Going to give that a C+. Kai Kelly definitely is underrated out of Stanford. Not a lot of tape on him, but solid pickup in the 5th round for cornerback depth, which they did really need. And then they get this offensive tackle at Oregon, who I did not know, so I couldn't grade him. And then you get Andrew Voorhees, which I think was a massive steal. Of course, he had to fall due to his ACL tear out of USC. But when you're watching the Caleb Williams tape, Andrew Voorhees was the best player on the offensive line. So I'm definitely going to give that an A. That was really good value in the 7th round. So overall, they have a bunch of A grades. So I'm going to round that to an A-, going to have them as my 7th highest rated draft class. The Giants have been putting together some really good draft classes the last couple of years. Of course, in 2021, they had Kayvon Thibodeau and Evan Neal both go within the first 2 picks, which I thought was really good value for both. And now this year, the coaching staff and Joe Schoen both had a really good draft class this year. First, Deonte Banks. He's a really good cornerback out of Maryland. He had a 10.0 RAS score. He had a phenomenal combine. And when you watch his film, he doesn't turn his head at all because he's got eyes in the back of his head, which is what was described basically to me. I like him, even though he is slightly inconsistent in zone coverage, of course. But he's a press man cornerback, or primary press man cornerback, and I think he fits the Mark Wingdale system very, very well. And then you get John Mitchell-Schmitz in the 2nd round, which I thought was really good value. He was the 2nd center taken when I had him as my number 1 center, and he was also another player that was in my top 50 who went 57th overall. I gave that pick an A+. And then Jalen Hyatt, I definitely believe that Jalen Hyatt was overrated this entire draft class process because he is not a dynamic route runner. He's a primary deep threat and a primary speed threat who's going to get put on islands, who's going to get put on a lot of go routes, especially in the slot. However, he's going to a really nice situation. He got drafted in the mid-3rd rounds, which was good value for a guy like Jalen Hyatt, who won the Biletnikoff, but A- grade for him. He's going to the New York Giants, who just add another deep threat, which they kind of tried to use with Kadarius Toney, but it didn't really work out. But now you get Jalen Hyatt, who was your straight go-route speed guy. I gave that pick an A-. And then Eric Gray is a guy that you're going to rotate in with Saquon Barkley at Oklahoma. I gave that pick a B+. Overall, they had a really solid draft class. I think their first 3 picks were very, very solid and were all very good value for where they were picked. I'm going to have them as an A, and the draft class, I'm going to have 6th overall. You could potentially call this Houston Texans draft class a franchise-changing draft class in Houston. First of all, they had the numbers 2 overall pick. They draft C.J. Stroud. Now, of course, I have my question marks about C.J. Stroud. Obviously, I think he is still he's not super comfortable in the pocket. However, he's a phenomenal thrower of the ball, and I obviously do have question marks about his ceiling. My comparisons were around like Dak Prescott and Jared Goff, and you're thinking Jared Goff and Dak Prescott are good quarterbacks, but everybody calls them mid, and obviously they have a capped ceiling. And we've never really seen C.J. Stroud play without an elite receiving core. Obviously, he had Garrett Wilson, Chris Olave, JSN, who went 20th overall this year, and then you had Marvin Harrison and Emeka Egbuka. He played with 5 first-round wide receivers, along with Paris Johnson Jr., who was the 6th overall pick, offensive tackle. So we'll have to see what he does without an elite supporting cast, but the Houston Texans do have a good offensive line, and they also addressed a lot of the offensive positions. But speaking about Will Anderson, I thought this was one of the best picks of the draft. They traded up from 12 all the way to 3 to get him. Now, they did have to give up next year's first-round pick, their own. I think that they really should have used Cleveland's, but you're betting on yourself. You're saying, hey, we're going to win. We don't care about our first-round pick next year. We're going to bet on ourselves, and we're going to select Will Anderson third overall. So you're mixing in those two, the second overall pick and the third overall pick. And I love Will Anderson out of Alabama. His sophomore season was wonderful. I mean, 17 and a half sacks, 31 tackles for loss. He had a crazy sophomore year. And then last year, he also had another good year. He's just athletically above a ton of people. And he's got a decent pass rush bag. He really uses his bull rush a lot. Sometimes depends on it too much. But he's got good bend out of Alabama, which is coveted. And he's really good against the run. So he's going to solidify that edge position for Houston, which I really, really like. They haven't had somebody like that since J.J. Watt, of course. But the only disparity in this class that I really didn't like was Juice Scruggs out of Penn State. I think that this was a far overreach. Obviously, he's a guard, center type. He flips between those two positions. And at center, I had him primarily as a guard. I think he would do better there, but I had a 5th-round grade on him. He goes in the second round, which I thought was super weird, or I thought that was way overreach, but it's addressing a position of need, of course, with the center position, and then you hope that that really helps CJ Stroud. And then you get Nathaniel Dell or Tank Dell out of Houston in the 3rd round. I thought this was right around where he was going to go, but Tank Dell is definitely underrated. He had gaudy numbers at Houston. He had over 1,500 yards. He was second in the FBS in receptions, and then also like second in touchdowns with 15, but he's also a dynamic special teamer. He's also athletic, and he's a smaller receiver, though. He is 5'8", 165 pounds, but he is dynamic, and he's going to come out of the slot for CJ Stroud. So I do like him, and he's really good after the catch as well. And then you got Dylan Horton out of TCU. I gave that a B. Henry Tuiotu was good value in the 5th. They pick another center for depth, Jarrett Patterson, which I gave a C+. I don't think they necessarily needed 2 centers in this draft class if you weren't sold with one of them. And then you go get Xavier Hutchinson, which I think was really, really good value in the 6th. I had a 4th-round grade on him. He's another bigger receiver out of Iowa State. He also was another guy with 1,300 yards out of Iowa State last year. I gave that an A-. And then Brandon Hill, I gave a B. I had a 7th-round grade on him. He went in the 7th round. But overall, Houston, they had a really, really good draft class, and it could potentially be called a franchise-changing if C.J. Stroud and Will Anderson both do really well next year. I'm going to have them 5th overall. I really like the Seattle Seahawks draft. I think that their idea was we're going to try to rebuild that Legion of Boom, and they're going to solidify their secondary. With Devin Witherspoon, this is a big hitting cornerback. When you watch his film, he definitely packs a punch at a lighter frame with 5'11", 181 pounds. But Devin Witherspoon is a cornerback who excels in man coverage. He got tested almost never last year at Illinois, as Illinois secondary was really good last year, and Devin Witherspoon was a massive reason why. But at number 5, I gave it an A- because I did have Christian Gonzalez as my best cornerback in this draft class. However, he fits with the Legion of Boom motto, where we're going to cover well, and we're going to hit and tackle really well at the secondary. However, I kind of wish they addressed more of their run defense. I don't think they necessarily did that within the first 2 rounds. But then you get Jackson Smith and Jigba. This rounds out your entire wide receiver core. Now you have DK Metcalf at the X. You have Tyler Lockett at the Y. Or you have Jackson Smith and Jigba, who I think is a primary slot guy. He's going to come right away, and he'll be that safety net for Geno Smith, as Geno Smith isn't going to need to throw the ball down the field every single down. And you have Jackson Smith Jigba. I thought that was a solid pick. I'm going to give it a B+ because I did have Zay Flowers slightly above him, but overall that's a good selection. And then Derek Hall, I thought was the only necessarily bad pick or okay pick that they had. I had Derek Hall at a 3rd-round grade, more in like the late 3rd, and he went in the early 2nd, which is fine. But then they get Zach Charbonnet, who is going to be their dual back, more of their power back, next to Kenneth Walker. Kenneth Walker is your speed back, athletic back, who you're going to run in zone schemes, and then Zach Charbonnet is going to be that goal line guy. He had 1,400 yards and 18 touchdowns last year at UCLA, and he also has pass catching upside. And then you get Anthony Bradford in the 4th, which I thought was fine value. Cameron Young is going to be that run plugger. He that's kind of all he does. He had like 2 sacks in total at Mississippi State or something, but he's going to be that nose tackle, run defending player out of Mississippi State. So we're going to give that a B minus. Mike Morris is once again another guy who's your run stopper. I gave that a B because I thought it was slightly better value as you got him in the 4th. And then Oluwatimi is going to probably be your starting center. And you found your starting center in the 5th round. Always going to like that. Get to give that an A minus. And then McClintosh in the 7th round. I gave that a B as he's probably going to be your 3rd or 4th running back on the depth chart. But overall, I loved the draft class a lot. I'm going to have it as an A, and I'm going to rank them 4th. The Colts are another team that I thought had a really good draft class, potential franchise-changing draft class with Shane Steichen as their new head coach. So you go ahead and draft Anthony Richardson 4th overall. Of course, Anthony Richardson, I did a whole prospect breakdown on him. Possibly the most athletic quarterback of all time. Of course, the combine would definitely say so, as he broke the broad jump record. He broke the vert record. He ran a 4.4, 4.40 at 6'4", 244 pounds. But obviously, he's so raw coming out of Florida. Last year, he had 17 touchdowns to 9 interceptions. He had a 54% completion percentage. He had multiple games under 50% completion percentage, such as South Carolina when he only completed 9 out of 27 passes. And he doesn't have the greatest pocket awareness, doesn't read defenses super well, but he's got that pocket mobility. He's a phenomenal dual threat quarterback. And I really liked where he went, especially with the Colts, to where Shane Steichen was one of the big reasons why Jalen Hurts had such a phenomenal year last year and was top 2 in MVP voting. And if he can do that again with Anthony Richardson, we have a definite top 10 quarterback and a top 3 dual threat quarterback in the league. And then you go ahead and get another phenomenal athlete with Julius Brents, who had a 9.99 RAS score, who also lit up the combine this year out of Kansas State. Is another guy who I thought was a really good pick. Had a borderline 2nd round grade on him, and he goes in the 2nd. And they really needed cornerback after they traded away Stephon Gilmore. You get Josh Downs out of UNC, which was another really good pick. Josh Downs is going to be your slot guy. He's going to be your safety net for Anthony Richardson. He's going to be, wide open, and Anthony Richardson is going to have an easy time throwing to him. Now, of course, not the fastest guy, and of course doesn't play through contact that well, but he's a primary slot guy. And then you get Blake Freeland, who is probably going to end up being a starter in the 4th round. Blake Freeland out of BYU, another combine warrior who had a humongous vert at 6'8". He's another big offensive lineman who's really solid in the run game. And then you get another combine star, Adetomiwa Adebaware, who ran a 4.49 at 280 pounds. This is going to be a speed edge rusher who's going to play the 7 tech or the 5 tech, who's going to be a situational pass rusher out of Northwestern. Daniel Scott out of Cal, I gave that a B+. Will Malroy, tight end, to try to help Anthony Richardson. I gave that a B-, though. I thought it was fine value, and he might potentially even be your starter, but I wasn't super high on Will Malroy this entire draft process. Evan Hall, just a running back. He'll probably be farther down the depth chart. But then I really loved the Jalon Jones pick out of Texas A&M cornerback. Had him at a 4th round grade. He goes in the 7th round. That's really good value there. And I gave this entire draft class an A. And I had them 3rd on my list. I had the Steelers at 2. I don't really think that they missed on any single one of their picks, other than Spencer Anderson, who I really don't know coming out of Maryland, but they had a phenomenal draft. I had mostly A's across the board as well. Project Jones, really, really smart trade up with the Patriots to jump the New York Jets, who were pretty much dead set on Project Jones, and you take Project Jones, who was your number 1 need offensive tackle last year. Your run game was inefficient. You allowed a lot of pressure with your rookie Kenny Pickett at the helm. You take Project Jones, who is super athletic and who doesn't allow a lot of pressure, and another guy who's really solid in the run game. He was my offensive tackle 1. I have him at A, or I gave it an A grade. And then you take Joey Porter Jr. at at the 32 spot at the beginning of the 2nd round. I had him as a top 10 guy, my number 8 overall prospect in this draft. You take him at 32, and Joey Porter Jr., of course, you keep him in town. He went to Penn State. His dad, Joey Porter Sr., was a linebacker on that 2008 Super Bowl champion Steelers team. You keep him in town with that camaraderie in Pittsburgh. Really good fit there, as well as you lose Cam Sutton this offseason. You really need a cornerback. You address your two biggest needs within your first two picks. Those are both A's, in my opinion. Keanu Benton is a guy who had as a borderline top 5 interior defensive tackle. I thought that was another really good pick. A lot of people are super high on Keanu Benton. I'm not so, but I did give that a B+ in the second round. And then Darnell Washington, I mean, that's another phenomenal pick to now have a dual tight end system with Pat Freiermuth as your primary pass catcher. And then you get Darnell Washington as your basically sixth offensive lineman, as he is 6'7", 264 pounds, really good run blocker, and another guy who's a really phenomenal red zone threat due to his size. Nate Herbig is a tweener, linebacker edge out of Wisconsin. I had him at edge. They drafted him essentially as a linebacker and outside linebacker. He's going to play that strong, either that strong side role, or he's going to rush the passer, rush the quarterback. So out of Wisconsin, liked that pick, gave that a B+. And then Corey Trice, cornerback out of Purdue, another guy, 4th round grade, went in the 7th. I gave that an A pick. I like that pick a lot. Overall, the Steelers just hit on a ton of picks. So I really like the draft class, but you may be thinking why I gave them 2. What team had a better draft class than this draft class? Well, you're going to have to look no further, because the Philadelphia Eagles had the best draft class in the entire 2023 NFL draft. You pick my number 1 overall player at 9th overall. Obviously, he had to fall, even though he is the most dominant player in the class, in my opinion. I think he has Pro Bowl potential. He has a deep bag of pass rush moves, and he's a dominant run defender who just obliterates double teams. I gave the pick an A+. He had to fall. He was involved in speed racing that involved the death of Devin Wilcock, his senior at Georgia, or his teammate at Georgia, and then one of the trainers. And then obviously his coaches didn't even vouch for his character. And he got arrested multiple times this offseason. Or he got arrested twice. He got the warrant out for his arrest with that speed racing charge, and then he got arrested for going 104 on the highway. And then he showed up to the combine, overweight. He jumped 9 pounds from the combine to his pro day. Wasn't able to finish his pro day due to cramps. But I think that this is probably the best situation for Jalen Carter to go. He has all the skill in the world, but those character concerns obviously are still there. But he rejoins his teammate Nolan Smith, and Nolan Smith is a guy that everybody raves about as a phenomenal character and a phenomenal teammate. He was a captain at Georgia. He's also going to a team with Nakobe Dean, who was that leader on the 2021 defense. And you also joined Jordan Davis, who the Eagles drafted last year, 18th overall, who is another high character guy. He's rejoining a ton of his teammates on that 2021 Georgia team that I think are going to keep him in line and keep him in check. And then also you lose Javon Hargrave this offseason. Oh, we're just going to replace him with Jalen Carter. And then you go get Nolan Smith at 30th overall. Nolan Smith fell more than I thought he potentially would, even though I had a borderline first-round grade on him. He is a smaller edge rusher at 6'2", 238 pounds, but he's got crazy bend. He's got really good speed off the edge, as we could see in the combine. He ran a 4.38. He had a high vertical at a 41.5. He tested athletically super well, but he is smaller, and he, of course, didn't have the best production at Georgia because they rotate a bunch, but was super efficient at edge, and also joins his teammate Jalen Carter. That was another really good pick for them. Then the only disparity in this class was Tyler Steen. I did think he was slightly a reach in the 3rd round. I had a late 3rd round grade on him, but you draft Tyler Steen and Sidney Brown back-to-back picks. Sidney Brown and Sidney Brown's probably going to be your C.J. Gardner-Johnson replacement. That's slot cornerback guy and that smaller free safety type. I gave that a B+. And then you go ahead and get Keely Ringo, who was a top 50 guy in my opinion. I had him 31 or 29. Within that range, I gave him an A+. He's a guy who is, of course, horrible, not very good in man coverage, but another guy on that Georgia national championship team in 2021 when he picked off Bryce Young for a pick 6 to seal the game off. Had that legendary moment at Georgia. But he's a 6'2 guy, 205 pounds, ran a 4.36 at the combine, and he's got those long arms. I think he could also potentially be a safety for them. So you go ahead and get 2 replacement safeties for as you lose Marcus Epps and you lose C.J. Gardner-Johnson last year. So now you get those 2 ball-hawking safeties back on your roster. And then you get Tanner McKee. This is just a depth quarterback. This is just depth for quarterback. And then Moro Ojomo, who I think is another guy, run clogger for depth. I give that B+, as I had a 5th round grade on him. But overall, You replace every single defensive position you needed to have with Nolan Smith on the edge, Jalen Carter replacing Javon Hargrave, and then you lose your two safeties. We'll just get two better safeties for you. This is an A+ if I've ever seen one. I'm going to have them as the number one team who had the best draft class this year. I really loved Philadelphia's draft class in total. But let me know your thoughts about my rankings. Let me know some of your favorite draft classes in the entire draft. Let me know how you thought your team did. And then make sure you like, comment, subscribe. I'll see you in the next one.